Here are 5 disappointing 2019 off-season moves looking back a year later. Each and every year the off-season comes and goes. We have players going to new teams, we have teams getting better, and teams getting worse. It can be argued that the 2019 off-season was one of the most interesting off-seasons in NBA history. So many superstar players changed teams. Anthony Davis became a Laker, Kawhi Leonard became a Clipper, Paul George became a Clipper. Russell Westbrook joined the Houston Rockets, and from what we've seen, obviously those players have been great additions to those teams. But this time we're going to be looking at 5 disappointing players for each team, and without further ado, let's get into the video. Firstly, if you enjoy these types of videos, I'd really appreciate if you guys could take 1 second out of your day just to click that like button. It helps the channel out tremendously, and it obviously helps the channel grow. If you're new and you are not subscribed but you enjoy NBA content, be sure to hit that subscribe button for NBA content every single week. And without further ado, let's get on with the video. At number 5, Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes is a damn solid player. He's someone who provides the Kings 14.7 points, 5 rebounds and 2.5 assists per game. I think he is just way too overpaid. I mean, $24 million this season for 4 years, $84 million overall. It's a lot of money. When you look at a player like Carmelo Anthony who's getting paid a minimum contract and the stats aren't too dissimilar, it makes you really question if the Sacramento Kings made a smart move, giving Harrison Barnes $84 million. Now, I do get that Barnes is 27 years old. Barnes has shown potential, and that Barnes fits better alongside the young core of De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield, who's actually not that young but got drafted as a mature age player, and of course Marvin Bagley. Don't get me wrong, Harrison Barnes is a nice fit. He allows a lot of freedom for the Kings to run different styles, but is he really worth $84 million? Probably not. He hasn't reached what he was able to do in Dallas, and obviously what his potential was in Golden State. In Dallas, he was a 20-point per game player, which the Kings were hoping he'd become in Sacramento. He currently ranks 25th in PER amongst all small forwards in the league, which, whilst PER doesn't always reflect the way a player actually plays on the court, in this case, it demonstrates that he most certainly hasn't lived up to the contract that he was offered last season, and in turn, he may actually limit what the Kings are able to do in the future in terms of acquiring talent to join De'Aaron Fox, to join Marvin Bagley, and to join the rest of the squad. The one bright spot is that he is just 27 years of age, and he has a lot of potential, so hopefully that contract can turn into something valuable for the Sacramento Kings. At number 4, Mike Conley. Going into the 2020 NBA season, it seemed as though the Utah Jazz had a solid point guard that would provide defense, hit open shots, and be a veteran leader alongside the young Donovan Mitchell and a defensive stopper in Rudy Gobert. But as of now, Jordan Clarkson seems more consistent than Mike Conley. He just hasn't been able to find any rhythm, and he's just messed up the rotation. But Conley was coming off the best year of his career in the 2018-19 season, one where he averaged 21 points per game, 6.5 assists, and 3.5 rebounds. So with Mike Conley joining Donovan Mitchell in the backcourt, the Utah Jazz looked to have one of the toughest backcourts in the entire league. Defensively, they were great, they were able to shoot, they were able to attack the hole, and they can both make plays for their teammates. Not to mention, Mike Conley is a great veteran guard who has playoff experience that Donovan Mitchell can seemingly look up to. But of course, this year he's just been disappointing. He's averaging just 13.8 points per game, 4.3 assists, and he's also dealt with injuries throughout his time in Utah. And having to play in the second unit has obviously affected his confidence coming off the bench in a few games this season. And if we're being honest, the quarantine break might have been the best thing for Mike Conley, and it's been stated by head coach Quinn Snyder that his role will somewhat change within the Utah offense going into the rest of the season in Orlando. And this might just be exactly what Mike Conley needs, and Joe Ingles said, "I'm really excited for Mike to have the ball more and be able to do what he's done throughout his entire career." If Conley can turn into Memphis Conley, the Utah Jazz could be a surprising team heading into the rest of the season, so let's just find out what happens. At number 3, Dwayne Dedmon. You probably didn't expect this one, so I'll keep it short and sweet. Dwayne Dedmon is on a 3-year, $40 million contract that expires in 2022. $13 million per year. Although he plays for the Atlanta Hawks now, it was actually the Sacramento Kings who signed Dwayne Dedmon this summer. The thing about Dwayne Dedmon is that he's a relatively productive player for a role player, but $40 million productive, not sure if he was really worth that. He had a solid 2 years in Atlanta, averaging around 10 points per game and 7.5 rebounds, but then he only averaged 5.8 points and 5.7 rebounds, which was not worth $40 million in Sacramento. He only ended up playing 34 games in Sacramento, starting 10 of them and playing 16 minutes per game. So $40 million for that level of production was clearly not worth it, and they shipped him back over to Atlanta, where he'd played in 2017 and 2018. And that was simply due to Atlanta needing a big man at the time. And they also got Clint Capella, which leaves a lot of people asking questions. Now you have a guy coming off the bench paid $40 million over 3 years and a new starting center in Clint Capella. In today's NBA, it's not a huge contract, but for his production level, he is clearly overpaid. Which leaves Dwayne Dedmon as a role player coming off the bench for $13.3 million per year for the next 2 years. So they can really only hope that he'll be a productive 31-year-old next season and 32-year-old the year after. Otherwise, that will be $13 million down the drain. At number 2, Danny Green. Look, this one can be debated. I think Danny Green is a great piece for this Lakers squad, and the Lakers wouldn't be where they are without him. He's literally a perfect 3-and-D player, he's a great shooter, and has championship DNA from the Spurs and the Toronto Raptors last season with Kawhi Leonard. Not to mention, he played with LeBron James in Cleveland when he entered the league. So, on paper, it seems like a great fit. The only problem is that this year, Danny Green has somewhat gone downhill since arriving in LA. Danny Green started off this season perfectly. Even though the Lakers lost to the Clippers in the first game of the season, he played great defense, and Danny Green went a perfect 5 from 5 from beyond the arc in the third quarter alone, sparking a 15-0 run. Since then, Danny Green hasn't really done anything like that, and he's been quite mediocre to say the least. He's been a streaky shooter, very inconsistent, and his lack of scoring has occasionally hurt the Los Angeles Lakers, and that's why they've been able to give Avery Bradley some more minutes. They've also gone out of their way to get J.R. Smith and Dion Waiters on the roster. Although whilst the Lakers now have these shooters like J.R. Smith and Dion Waiters, they don't play defense like Danny Green. And that's one reason alone that Danny Green will always be a valuable piece for this team. But just looking at his stats from this season compared to last season, he's averaging 8 points, shooting a pretty bad 72% from the free throw line, which is definitely worse than last season's average of 84%. He's shooting 41% from the field, which is less than his 46% from last season, and just 37% from 3, which is far less than his percentage last season, which was 45% from 3 in Toronto. And so with LeBron James and Anthony Davis both on the roster, you'd assume that he'd get much more open looks, but his field goal percentage just seems far worse from last year, and his shooting consistency hasn't looked great this season for the Los Angeles Lakers, which obviously can change during the playoffs, and I definitely expect it to change, as he has championship level DNA, and I think he'll be a great piece come the NBA playoffs when it gets down to crunch time. If you're a great defender with an elite 3-point shot, it's only a matter of time before things start to click, and I can only imagine the damage that he'll do during the playoffs. Especially with the loss of Avery Bradley, he will have to step it up if the Lakers are to win the championship this season. And of course, he hasn't been the most disappointing player on this list, but I think he could have played better for the Lakers this season, as he did last season, especially in terms of percentage. And at number 1, I think this one is quite obvious: Al Horford. Whilst Al Horford has been a great big man for many years in the league, whether it was in Atlanta being named a 4-time All-Star or a 1-time All-Star in Boston, Horford this year hasn't necessarily been bad, but just very disappointing. The role that Al Horford currently plays for the 76ers actually is fine if he were getting paid about $10 to $15 million per year, but that's not the case at all. And the 76ers will pay him an average salary of $27.25 million over the next 4 years. At that point, Al Horford will be 36 years old and nearing the end of his career, getting paid $27 million per season. Currently, he's averaging just 12 points, 6.9 rebounds, and 4 assists on 44% from the field and 33% from 3, playing 30 minutes per game. We know why the 76ers got him though, and it was mainly due to the fact that he was giving the 76ers and Joel Embiid a lot of problems in Boston, and Al Horford really limited the opportunity for the 76ers to advance in the Eastern Conference. And without facing off against a big man like Al Horford, who seemingly gave Joel Embiid huge problems in the playoffs, it seemed like a great move. In terms of his stats, he hasn't been too dissimilar for the way he's played his entire career. This year in Philly, he's averaged 12 points and 6.9 rebounds, and last year in Boston, he averaged 13.6 points and 6.7 rebounds, basically with the same field goal attempts. So it's really not his stats, but more so his style of play, as he's become a spot-up shooter, which is clearly not Al Horford's game, and he just doesn't fit in the 76ers offense, nor is he the defender that he once was in Atlanta. But paying him $109 million to do that at age 33 is probably the most disappointing out of anyone on this list, which is why it was named number 1. With that said, let me know what you think about this list, and let me know if you have any other players that you believe have been very disappointing from the 2019 offseason. With that said, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like to show your support, subscribe for NBA content every single week, and